For me, this is just a single shot. We haven't done HDR because we're using a single exposure. And I'm able to get a pretty good image out of it. The reason I wanted to show you this before I get into HDR is to show you two things. The first is people use HDR more often than they need to. There's a tremendous amount you can get out of your images without HDR. But then the second thing is, if you do get a tremendous amount of shadow detail out of your image, let's see the difference. I'm going to hit the reset button. This is what we started with. This is what we ended up with, at least with the new process version there. Then the one thing you got to look out for is an area that used to be dark. You're going to want to zoom up on it. And in that area, you're going to want to look for noise. Because a lot of the times, not so much on this image, especially with the texture of the brick in there, if this was something that was overly smooth, you might be more noticeable. But this isn't bad at all. I'm actually rather amazed. Up down here, I start to see it. I don't know if you can see it in here or not, but I'm starting to see quite a bit of noise. If I brighten the photograph more, just so you can see what's here, not that I actually think it needs to be brightened, you see the noise down there? And if we do HDR, we're going to not have that noise. And that's one of the big advantages. So if you ever take a single shot, you end up pulling out a tremendous amount of shadow detail, and when you're done, it looks really noisy in it, where it used to be dark, then you maybe wanted to have done HDR to avoid that noise. So let's take this image, and I'm going to see if I can maybe make a virtual copy of it. I'll go back to the grid by typing G. I'll right-click and say Virtual Copy. And then I'm going to drag that virtual copy. Well, actually, it's already in the folder called HDR. So that way we can compare this to what we end up getting when we do a true HDR effect, where we merge multiple exposures. And you can see the difference between using a single exposure and multiple. I'm going to go back to the images that we have here, and I'm just going to make sure there are no adjustments applied to them already, because I don't know what I used these images for last. I teach a lot, and I might have used them for an odd purpose. So I'll just right-click on them, choose Develop Settings, and Reset. That means act as if I've never opened them before. And it looked like they had been adjusted. And then let's talk about what we want to do to merge these into a single image, where we can get that whole brightness range in one shot. In order to do this, you need to have something other than Lightroom. Lightroom can't do it all by itself. If you own Photoshop, you can do it. And to do it in Photoshop, here's what you'd need to do. The first thing you want to do is double check a setting. Go to the Lightroom menu and choose Preferences. And in your preferences, there's a choice called External Editing. And that means when I send this image off to another program, what's it going to use for a file format and that kind of stuff. All I want to do is make sure that this file format is set to TIFF and not PSD. If it's set to PSD, we would have to do 1 to 2 extra steps in Photoshop and in Lightroom. But if we use TIFF, it will be much more automated. So I'm just making sure that's TIFF. Now I have these images. If I want to do it with Photoshop, I go to the Photo menu, I choose Edit In, and if I have Photoshop, I should have choices in here for various Photoshop commands, one of which is Merge to HDR Pro. So let's choose that. I just downloaded 7.3, so I'll open it anyway. But it's interesting that it gave me that warning because I specifically went and downloaded updates when we were at lunch. Anyway, it's combining these 3 images together into a single file. Then it's going to present me with a large dialog box full of options where I could process the file right here using Photoshop. You see all the sliders on the right side where we could process it. I find these sliders don't give me as good of an end result as what I can get from Lightroom. So I'm not going to use them. Let's just take a quick look at what's in here though. In the lower left, these are the 3 exposures we're merging, if I can speak. And below each one, it tells you how much of a difference there is between them. This one is at the metered exposure, like the default exposure your camera would give. This one is 2 stops underexposed. This one is just over 2 stops overexposed. The little green check boxes simply indicate that you're using all 3 images. This is a preview, but ignore that preview until we get into Lightroom.